So we anticipate carrying forward about $75,000 for a total of 210,665 in deletions that close the budget gap. So you can see that the preliminary budget was $25,219,077. We have an adjusted available funds of $25,082,721, and that includes an additional $102,840 that has been identified through the House Ways and Means deliberation in additional Chapter 70 funding. We received last week, and I believe I included that in your packet, a memo from the House Ways and Means for an increase to not only our Chapter 70 funding, but our unrestricted local aid. And so after having conversations with the chair of the Board of Selectmen, our town administrator, as well as the town accountant/finance director, it was determined that the school department should add those available funds for Chapter 70 into their budget, and the town municipal government will add the additional unrestricted local aid into their budget. So that further decreases the gap between what the available funds are and the funds that we've identified that we need in the preliminary budget, leaving an undesignated budget gap of $44,292. So we're very pleased that we're this close at this particular time in the budget process.
Thank you, Kathy. Just a couple of comments. Every year when we, at least the last several years, when we start to put our budget together for the next fiscal year, we are generally looking at, as a committee, a level services budget. And the reason we do that is because we know that revenues are going to be difficult, and it's unlikely that we're going to be able to exceed level services. Unfortunately, level services has become our goal. Every year early in the budget process, we're looking at a huge deficit, because even though we can project what our budget will be for the next fiscal year based on level services, we cannot project revenues really accurately in January. A lot happens between January and June when the town meeting occurs, and obviously even more until the final budget is signed by the governor sometime in late June. So this year, back in January, we had a significant deficit in our level services budget, about $1.2 million. A lot of things have changed and evolved, and we've learned as a committee that in January you be patient, that you not panic in January. There's plenty of time to panic in June. So what we try to do is look at that level services budget. If we can make some adjustments, as the superintendent has done, we'll make them. But things change fairly quickly over the last few weeks, and some of the things that changed is we were able to realize more revenues from the town because of a lesser increase in the health insurance premiums than was previously projected, because of additional revenues we had from cell tower monies that came in, and I think a lot of it was from the snow and ice budget. Obviously, this past winter, the cost for snow and ice removal was about $600,000 less than it had been the prior 2 fiscal years. So all those added to the additional Chapter 70 money gets us down to what we consider to be a manageable deficit. I do want to say, before we open it up for discussion, that North Reading, over the last 6, 7, 8 years, has established a very good working relationship amongst committees. And we have what we call the finance planning team, which are representatives from the school committee, the Board of Selectmen, and the finance committee, and we meet once a month. The chairs of the committee, the vice chairs, and then the superintendent, the town administrator, the finance director for the school committee, and the business manager for the town. And the Board of Selectmen and the finance committee have been extremely supportive in getting us to where we are today. If there's additional revenues that can be directed towards the school department budget, they've done it. And they've done it consistently over the last several years, and it's really what's kind of bailed us out. Obviously, this budget is, we're kind of like a lot of families right now that come home and are living paycheck to paycheck. We're living fiscal year to fiscal year. So even though people want you to plan out over 2, 3, or 4 years, without knowing the revenue situation, it is extremely difficult, if not impossible, to do it. So what we've tried to do over the last several years, again, is take advantage of whatever opportunities we have. The last 3 fiscal years, we had the ARROW money that Mr. Nelson pointed out. Fiscal year 10 and 11, I think it was about $1 million each year. Last year was $339,000. We lost that money. Well, it was fortuitous that, again, we had the opportunity to get monies back from snow and ice and from some other sources. So, again, it's not the best way to plan, but we basically are going year to year. And it's very gratifying to see our budget deficit down to about $44,000, something that I think we can manage, as long as nothing else goes wrong. So I'd ask for any other comments from the school committee before we move into the public discussion. Mel?
Okay, first, I think we need to have a little bit of caution about the extra money from the House Ways and Means budget, because that's not approved. So I think that's a best case scenario. Hopefully that will come through, but that $102,000 isn't guaranteed. I think the other thing we need to be cautious about is, as Jerry mentioned, a lot of these funds are coming from one-time sources that might not be there next year. And every year we say that because you have to say that. We might, if we have a snowy winter, we won't see that free cash that we're able to draw from this year. So it's great that we're at $44,000 deficit or a little more if we don't get all of the House Ways and Means budget funding that they've allocated for Chapter 70. It's nothing like an almost balanced budget to keep the crowd down at a budget hearing. Other thing to point out is, Jerry mentioned it, a third of our increase this year is replacing the ARA funds, the federal funds. And I'll praise this committee, this administration, and the past administration under Dr. Troughton for smartly not spending, and I see Mrs. Vaca nodding her head, she was part of that past group, spending all of our money in 2 years, and we basically spread it out over 4 years. And I think that really helped, and we saw a lot of districts the last 2 years that couldn't make up all that money they spent in the 2 years, and we were able to spread that out. The one big issue I have, and it's a conundrum or a catch-22 that I think we're going to be facing moving forward, is we're seeing slightly falling enrollments. And a lot of times that triggers a bell in people's heads that says, hey, we don't have to spend as much on education anymore because we have fewer kids. And in some ways that's correct, but in a lot of ways it's not correct. And I think the biggest challenge we're going to have moving forward is making up that gap, especially in materials, equipment, and technology. I think that's one of the biggest issues we faced. We struggled. We tried to introduce a new science program. And I don't know where that stands, but we looked at that, and the challenge was we can't afford the materials every year, the workbooks and the kits, the lab kits, et cetera. So I think that's our biggest challenge, is to be mindful of economic times, be mindful of slightly falling enrollments, although my mantra is looking at my neighborhood and seeing 4 or 5 new families moved in the last 6 months, all with children under school age, that the enrollment's going to be coming back up. But we have to be mindful of all these things while at the same time trying to get things back into our schools that we haven't had for a long time, or getting things into our schools that we really should be offering that we aren't offering right now. And I think that's going to be our biggest challenge, is balancing that shrinking enrollment with getting programs into the schools that we should be adding.
Thanks, Mel. Anybody else from the committee want to make a comment? Okay. Anybody? Comment, question?
Question,
All right.
do you not have to increase user fees?
Good question. I think it's our mindset not to increase user fees. There's no increase of user fees of any kind other than paying for parking at the high school. No, I'm only kidding. I'm only kidding. No. There's no... There's no increase in user fees built into this budget. I will say this, that tomorrow at the athletic subcommittee, we are going to discuss our policy regarding waiving athletic user fees and other fees. So that is going to be discussed tomorrow, because it is becoming a bit of a problem as far as, the more and more people that are having their fees waived, the deficit is increasing as to what's available and what has to come out of our appropriation to fund athletics and activities. So we are going to discuss that.
You mean the family cap?
Not the family cap, the people that are eligible. What we've done in the past, as you're aware, is if you're eligible for the free lunch program, then you're eligible to get your user fee waived. We never had very many that we had to waive, and if we did, the athletic boosters were very generously paying for those people that couldn't afford it. Right now, the athletic boosters don't have the money, and the number of people that can't afford to pay are increasing, so we're going to have to deal with that fairly soon. Yeah. Questions or comments? Jeff?
I'd be curious, Carl, you talked about basically a 15% reduction over the past 3 or 4 years in the operating cost of the schools aside from salary. So I'd be curious from you and the district and the principals,
Good question.
What's the impact school by school on
Yeah.
the district that we don't have this money, haven't been able to get money increase in
Sure.
Steve?
First, I would ask her, can you pick up that audio from the audience?
No.
Okay, so I'll repeat the question, and then possibly one of the principals or directors can answer that. The question from
Gonna have to go to
Jeff.
the mic.
Excuse me.
I was just going to say, if
Go to the
someone's
mic.
going to answer it, they need to go
Yes.
to the
Okay.
mic.
The question from Jeff is, what is the impact for you to have experienced a 15% decrease in your operating budget these past 4 or 5 years?
Volunteers? Kathy?
Well, it's fine.
Oh, okay, all right. That's why we're calling on you, because everybody else has been here longer than you. Does anyone want to come up and, John? They were all pointing to you. I wasn't going to call them. They were all pointing.
I think it's a very good question. I'll speak only for the high school, where the budget, hovers around $250,000 for the year. And what the impact has been that as I've seen it, is that I think we suffer in our inability to buy the kinds of resources that we need to support all classes that we want to. In some cases, it might be putting off a year to update something that we wanted to purchase. That might be a textbook, for example, okay? I think we're all understanding of the fact that we've introduced a lot of new courses at the high school over the last several years, and we do that with no expenditures outside of the operating budget for the school. So for us to continue to offer new courses, we're absorbing the cost of running those courses, no additional staff, but also no operating expense for that to purchase supplies. We do that all within the operating budget that exists. So when it keeps getting cut to the tune of 5% or as much as 10% in a given year, you can see what the impact is. The good thing is people tighten the belt and we make it work, but you can only go so long with doing that. And I think we're at a point now where it may not be impossible to do something next year, but it would be less likely that we would be able to do it to the extent that we want to do it.
So are you operating with older textbooks that you like, not enough textbooks?
I would say
Things like that?
I would say not a question of not enough textbooks. I can say very, very honestly that we do not deprive any student of a textbook. We will always find the money to make that work, and we always have. But it might be that we put off a year of updating a textbook in accounting that might be a 2003 edition, and we really should be something more current, as an example. Consumables, too. We put it off for a year because we just simply can't afford it, because there are those things you have to run the school. And it could be things like photocopy paper or ink cartridges for computer printers, things like that you cannot do without. Now you put the textbook off a year, maybe we'll be fortunate enough to do that next year. So that's kind of how we've operated for the last, I would say this would be now probably the 4th consecutive fiscal year with a reduction of somewhere between 5 and 10% at the high school, and I think across the board.
It's all the
always been, I
schools.
think, it's been standard across all the schools. We've always gone into it with an understanding that we'll all, I guess if you will, sacrifice the same amount so that we're not touching positions teaching positions that we've always worked very hard to preserve.
And as Kyle's pointed out many times in the past, our budget's made up primarily 80% salary and 20% expenses, so that when we go to cut, we look at the expense side. But as John said, it's been 4 years in a row now, so there's not a whole lot left to cut on the school expense side. Patrick?
Sure. Patrick Daly, Director of Academic Services. I'll address the question there. Mr. Webster, Mr. Nelson alluded to science program that was cut. The small cap budget, if you look at it from fiscal year 10, was about $86,000. It was reduced to $25,000 last year. So level funding gives us to $25,000 again, which is, again, better than nothing, but not enough to bring in a program that we're looking to bring in. So we're being very creative. We're working very hard to try and get these things met, but it's very, very difficult to consider new programs, new funding. And the new way of thinking about things, it's hands-on. It's not just a textbook anymore. It's a textbook, it's a kit, it's interactive, it's video, it's all these things that are merging, and this costs money and has a cost to it. And these are things that we're not able to support with these kind of cuts. The other major...
Can you give an example of like the science program you're looking at?
The program that we're looking at is called NOADM for 3rd grade. Right now it's in place. And the teachers, the students absolutely love it. It's a hands-on program. So we're looking to move that into 4th and 5th. We have a program that we're piloting at the middle school right now that is also hands-on. So we're looking to make sure that those